What's up, guys? Golden Knight here. You sit in front of the paper, or open the program on your computer, ready to start drawing. But then the minutes pass, and you keep staring at the blank screen and it's staring back at you. You adjust the brush. Change the reference. Open YouTube to get inspired. And before you realize it, 40 minutes have already passed and you have done absolutely nothing. In this video, you will understand what is really happening when your mind refuses to cooperate. It is an honest conversation about the real mechanisms that sabotage your concentration and why they make so much sense that you never question them. When you finish watching, you will look at your drawing sessions in a completely different way. The feeling of wanting to draw without wanting to start. There is a contradiction that lives at the center of the experience of almost every artist. The desire to have drawn is much greater than the desire to draw. You want to see the result. You want to feel the progress. You want to look at a filled page and know that you were the one who made that. But the act itself, the moment of picking up the pencil and placing the first line on the paper, carries a very heavy weight. Because starting means exposing yourself to the possibility that what comes out will not match what exists in your head. And the brain, which is very good at avoiding discomfort, finds 1,000 ways to postpone that moment without you realizing that you are doing it. What makes this so difficult to identify is that this procrastination rarely looks like procrastination. In fact, it looks like research. It looks like preparation. It looks like you are doing something useful when you spend 20 minutes choosing the right playlist, or reorganizing your desk, or saving references in a folder that you will never open. The brain is extraordinarily creative when the goal is to avoid the discomfort of a blank screen. And the more you like drawing, the more this means to you, the greater the invisible weight that accompanies each attempt to start. This has a name in psychology. It is called experiential avoidance. It is an automatic mechanism of the nervous system that interprets the discomfort of beginning as a threat to be avoided. And the problem is that the more you give in to this mechanism, the more the brain learns that this is the correct response to that situation. What you need to change is the way you interpret that resistance. Instead of reading that feeling of heaviness at the beginning as a sign that you are not in the right state to draw, you need to start recognizing it as something inevitable that will be there regardless of the day or the motivation, and that you need to deal with it. The weight of drawing to prove something. There is a question that most artists ask unconsciously in almost every drawing session. What will this drawing say about me? You do not sit and think this deliberately, but it is there. When the drawing stops being an act and becomes proof, concentration disappears because the mind is no longer focused on the process. It is monitoring the result in real time, evaluating, judging, comparing. This constant monitoring has an enormous cost. The human brain cannot, efficiently, create and criticize at the same time. They are two fundamentally different modes of operation. The creative mode is exploratory, open, willing to make mistakes. The critical mode is analytical, comparative, pattern-oriented. When you try to operate in both simultaneously, what happens is not balance, it is paralysis. You start a line and you are already evaluating whether it is right before finishing it. You sketch a shape and immediately compare it to the reference, to another artist's work, to what you did yesterday. And in this state, focusing is almost impossible, because attention is divided between creating and defending yourself from judgment. What fuels this cycle, most of the time, is a very specific belief about what error means. For many artists, making a mistake is not just making a mistake. It is proof that you are not good enough, that you have not evolved as much as you should have, that maybe the talent you believe you have does not really exist. This relationship with error turns each drawing session into a test of identity. And no one can concentrate on something when they feel that what is at stake is not a drawing, but the confirmation of who you are. The pencil becomes too heavy when it carries that weight. Artists who are able to maintain focus for long periods, most of the time, are not more disciplined. They have simply developed, consciously or unconsciously, a different relationship with what drawing means about them. But there is still another factor that interferes with concentration in an even more concrete way, and it has everything to do with the environment you have created around your practice. The environment you created trained your brain not to focus. There is something that almost no one considers when complaining that they cannot concentrate on drawing. The brain learns through repetition. If every time you sit down to draw you also open Instagram, reply to a message, pause to check a notification, the brain begins to register this set of behaviors as a unit. Over time, the very act of sitting down to draw becomes a trigger for dispersion, because that is exactly what that context has always produced. You do not have a focus problem. You have an environment that has been trained, repetition after repetition, to fragment your attention. This is more serious than it seems because the environment is not just the physical space. It is the complete set of stimuli that surround your practice. It is the phone on the table. It is the browser open with 10 tabs. It is the habit of putting a video in the background because silence feels too heavy. Each of these elements competes for your attention constantly, and the brain, which evolved to respond to novelty and movement, will be drawn to them regardless of how much you try to resist. Willpower is not an infinite resource. And using mental energy to ignore distractions is energy that no longer goes to the drawing. The session ends before it truly begins, not because you gave up, but because the system was configured against you from the start. What makes this even more complicated is that many artists have developed a dependency on certain stimuli to be able to create. The playlist that needs to be the right one. The podcast playing in the background. The feeling that without some type of parallel noise or movement, the silence becomes unbearable. And there is something real in this, because for some people certain stimuli do in fact help create a more comfortable state to work in. The problem appears when the stimulus stops being support and becomes a crutch. When you realize that you can no longer spend 10 minutes drawing without checking something, without pausing, without seeking a small dose of novelty. That is the sign that the environment has taken control of your capacity for attention. The change does not begin with willpower. It begins with design. With decisions made before sitting down to draw. The brain responds to structure, and you can use this to your advantage instead of fighting the current every time. But even with the environment adjusted, there is an even more fundamental layer that determines the quality of your concentration, and it has to do with what you are trying to do when you sit down to draw. The absence of a real intention for the session. There is an enormous difference between sitting down to draw and sitting down to do something specific. And this difference, which seems small, is responsible for a huge number of sessions that end without anything real having happened. When you sit without a clear direction of what you are going to do, the brain enters search mode. You keep looking for what to do, choosing between 1,000 possibilities, testing an idea and abandoning it before developing it, starting a study and stopping halfway because you do not know exactly where it should lead. This constant search is the absence of an anchor. And without an anchor, attention naturally drifts to where the effort is lower, which almost always is outside the drawing. The brain needs a clear entry point to begin truly engaging. A vague task like, I'm going to draw today, offers little traction. A specific intention like, I'm going to study how light falls on curved surfaces using 3 different references, gives the brain something concrete to process. And this concrete processing is what produces real focus. There is also a problem that comes from the other extreme, which is when the session has an intention, but that intention is too large for the time available. You sit down with the idea of finishing a complex illustration in 2 hours, and when you realize that the progress is smaller than you expected, frustration appears and with it the desire to stop. Or you set a goal so ambitious that you do not even know where to start, and the result is the same as having no goal at all, paralysis. The expectation needs to be adjusted to the time and to the moment, in order to create realistic conditions for the work to happen. What changes when you begin to define real intentions for each session is the relationship with the time you have available. Instead of needing an entire afternoon to feel that it is worth drawing, you begin to recognize that 20 minutes with clarity produce more than 2 hours of drifting. And this perception has a powerful cumulative effect, because each session that ends with the feeling that something was done builds a positive memory associated with the practice. The brain begins to anticipate the session differently. The resistance at the beginning gradually decreases, because the repeated experience of completing something has reconfigured the way your mind perceives the act of sitting down to draw. What you avoid seeing when you avoid focusing. There is a level of honesty about the lack of focus that most people never reach, because getting there requires looking at something uncomfortable. Dispersion, most of the time, is protection. When you always find a reason not to start drawing, in reality, very likely, you are afraid of, what if I truly try and still am not good enough? As long as you do not focus, that question never needs to be answered. The possibility remains open. And keeping the possibility open is, in a way, more comfortable than testing it. This is not weakness. It is one of the most sophisticated mechanisms of self-preservation that the human brain possesses. Psychologists call this protective self-sabotage, and it appears strongly especially in people who care deeply about what they do. The greater the meaning drawing has for you, the greater the perceived risk of discovering that you are not as good as you want to be. And the brain, which prioritizes protection above growth, finds ingenious ways to ensure that you never get too close to that test. The cruel irony is that it is precisely the artists who love what they do the most who often struggle the most to actually sit down and do it. Because for them, the result carries a weight that goes far beyond a drawing. What you need to change is the narrative that you are simply not a focused person. This narrative is convenient because it places the problem in a fixed personality trait, something you cannot change, and therefore something that absolves you of the responsibility to try differently. But focus is not a personality trait. It is a state that emerges when the right conditions are present. And one of the most important conditions is the willingness to be present for what the process will reveal about you, including the parts you would prefer not to see. Artists who develop real focus are not those who eliminated fear. They are the ones who learned to draw with it present, without letting it take the wheel. And this decision, made repeatedly, session after session, is what separates the artists who evolve from those who keep waiting to feel ready forever. If this video helped you in any way, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next ones. Thanks so much for watching all the way through. Don't forget to take a look at the description. There are several important links there that can help you even more. See you in the next video.